3 bullets, poison, a frozen river. And still, Prince Yusupov wasn't sure Rasputin was dead. The conspirators had lured him to the palace with promises of meeting the prince's beautiful wife. They fed him cyanide-laced cakes and wine, enough poison to kill 5 men. When he kept eating and drinking, asking when the princess would arrive, they panicked and shot him in the chest. He collapsed, seemingly dead. But as they prepared to dispose of the body, Rasputin's eyes snapped open. He lunged at Yusupov, clawing at his throat before crawling up the stairs toward escape. They shot him 3 more times, beat him with clubs, bound him in chains, and threw him through a hole in the frozen Neva River.
Some men leave behind legacies, others leave stains you can't scrub out.
How does a peasant from the Siberian wilderness become so powerful, so terrifying, that it takes a conspiracy of Russian nobles to bring him down? How does one man's shadow grow so dark that it helps topple 3 centuries of Romanov rule? Stay with us as we unravel the cosmic forces that created the most enigmatic figure in Russian history, a man whose stars and numbers tell the story of divine gifts twisted into instruments of empire's destruction. In the winter of 1869, as howling winds swept across the endless Siberian steppes, Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin entered the world in the village of Pokrovskoye. This wasn't just any birth. This was an Aquarian soul taking form under a cosmic blueprint that would reshape Russian history. The village itself was barely a collection of wooden huts scattered across the frozen wasteland, weeks of travel from any major city. Here, where shamanic traditions still whispered through Orthodox prayers, where peasants read omens in animal tracks and weather patterns, young Grigory's unusual gifts first emerged. His birth chart reads like a prophecy. That Gemini ascendant, the sign of the twins, gave him the supernatural ability to be multiple people simultaneously. To the peasants, he was one of them, speaking their language of earth and survival. To the nobles, he became a mysterious holy man touched by divine grace. This duality wasn't mere adaptation. It was written in his stars, allowing him to navigate between worlds that never normally touched. But Gemini energy cuts both ways. The same gift that let him speak to emperors and peasants alike would later allow him to mask his darkness behind a facade of holiness. His Aquarian sun, positioned powerfully in the 10th house of public reputation, marked him for fame that would either elevate or destroy. Aquarius rebels against all authority, except its own vision of truth. Combined with his life path number 1, the number of pioneers and leaders, we see a soul destined to forge new paths, regardless of who stood in his way. As a child, Rasputin's Pisces moon in the 12th house manifested as an uncanny ability to see what others couldn't. Villagers whispered about the boy who could predict which horses would fall lame, which crops would fail, which children would fall ill. His soul urge, number 3, drove him towards self-expression, but filtered through his growing awareness of being chosen. This became a need to be seen as special, as touched by forces beyond the ordinary world. During his teenage years, operating under essence number 7, the vibration of spiritual seeking and isolation, young Rasputin began having visions that proved disturbingly accurate. He would fall into trances, his piercing blue eyes rolling back, and emerge with knowledge he couldn't possibly possess. The local priest was both fascinated and frightened by the boy's gifts.
A smile like a sermon, secrets like sin.
But spiritual gifts without proper guidance can become spiritual arrogance. His Jupiter, conjunct Neptune, in Aries in the 12th house created genuine mystical abilities, the power to tap into otherworldly realms and channel healing energy. Yet Neptune is also the planet of delusion, of losing oneself in fantasies of divine favor. When Jupiter expands whatever it touches, it can transform spiritual gifts into spiritual pride. The first signs of trouble emerged during his wild teenage years. His Mars in Leo in the 5th house didn't just crave attention, it demanded worship. Even then, villagers noticed something unsettling about young Grigory's intense gaze, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room, how he seemed to feed on the discomfort of others. In 1892, at age 23, something happened that changed Rasputin forever. While working in the fields, he claimed to have seen a vision of the Virgin Mary herself, commanding him to leave his family and seek spiritual truth. Whether genuine mystical experience or psychological break, this vision launched him on years of religious pilgrimage that would transform a Siberian peasant into Russia's most powerful unofficial advisor. As his numerological essence shifted to 3 during this period, his natural charisma exploded. Everywhere he traveled, to monasteries, holy sites, and religious communities, people were mesmerized by his presence. His eyes seemed to see directly into their souls, exposing their secrets, their fears, their desperate needs. But it was during these wandering years that Rasputin encountered the Klisti, a secret religious sect that would provide the theological justification for his later excesses. The Klisti preached that sin could be purged through more sin, that physical ecstasy was a pathway to spiritual transcendence. Their rituals involved frenzied dancing, self-flagellation, and sexual rites they believed brought them closer to God. For a man with Venus in Capricorn in the 8th house, the house of taboo desires and hidden obsessions, these practices offered dangerous permission. His Venus placement craved intense, transformative experiences, but its shadow side sought intensity for its own sake, pushing boundaries not for spiritual growth, but for the thrill of transgression. This is where his cosmic blueprint began revealing its darker potential. His Venus quincunx Mars aspect created constant internal warfare between his desires and his actions. He was simultaneously drawn to forbidden intimacy and public adoration, a tension that would eventually tear him apart from within. Yet his healing abilities were undeniably real. Witnesses from this period describe miraculous recoveries, chronic ailments disappearing under his touch, psychological torments lifted by his presence. His moon in Pisces in the 12th house channeled genuine divine compassion. But that same placement also made him vulnerable to emotional extremes and escapist tendencies that would later manifest as addictions. Everything changed in 1903 when Rasputin arrived in St. Petersburg, claiming divine visions had called him to the capital. His numerological essence had shifted to 2, the vibration of partnerships and diplomacy, as if the universe itself was preparing him for the alliance that would define Russian history. The city's religious elite were immediately divided. Some saw a genuine holy man whose healing powers defied explanation. Others sensed something predatory beneath his pious exterior. But word of the Siberian mystic reached the right ears, and in 1905 he was summoned to meet the most desperate parents in the empire. Tsar Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra were watching their son die. 4-year-old Tsarevich Alexei suffered from hemophilia, a genetic condition that caused uncontrollable bleeding from the slightest injury. The best doctors in Europe were powerless. The heir to the throne was literally bleeding to death, and with him the future of the Romanov dynasty. The moment Rasputin entered the nursery and placed his hands on the suffering child, the bleeding stopped. Not slowed, stopped completely. The boy, who had been writhing in agony, fell into peaceful sleep. The imperial doctors had no explanation. The parents had found their miracle. But miracles come with a price, and Rasputin's price was access to unlimited power. His Sun conjunct Pluto aspect, though wide, began exerting its influence. Pluto transforms everything it touches, but it also creates obsession with power and control. As Rasputin's influence over the royal family grew, this aspect transformed his genuine healing gifts into tools of manipulation. He began to understand that the imperial family's desperation made them completely vulnerable to his influence. During his Essence 6 phase, from 1907 to 1910, the vibration of responsibility and service, Rasputin cemented his position as indispensable. Every time Alexei fell ill, only the mystic's presence could save him. But the shadow side of Essence 6 is martyrdom complex, the belief that others cannot survive without constant intervention. Rasputin began to see himself as the only thing standing between the Romanov dynasty and destruction. His progress chart during this period shows his ascendant slowly shifting toward Cancer, intensifying his emotional nature and his need to be needed. But Cancer energy, when corrupted, becomes manipulative, using emotional dependency as a form of control. The Empress Alexandra became so psychologically dependent on Rasputin that she couldn't make decisions without consulting him first. This gave him unprecedented access to state secrets, military decisions, and political appointments. His Mars square Saturn aspect, creating lifelong tension between impulse and authority, now manifested as resentment toward anyone who questioned his influence. He began using his position to settle personal scores, to eliminate rivals, to accumulate wealth and power far beyond any peasant's dreams. But power without restraint inevitably leads to corruption, and Rasputin's corruption was written in his stars. His Neptune in the 12th house, which had granted him genuine mystical abilities, now manifested its shadow side through escapism and addiction. Historical records confirm his use of opium, cocaine, and alcohol, not recreational indulgence but compulsive self-medication for the psychological pressure of wielding power over an empire. His documented sexual excesses weren't mere scandals. They were the manifestation of his Venus in the 8th house seeking ever more intense taboo experiences. His connections to the Clisti sexual rituals, his numerous affairs with society women who sought his spiritual guidance, his belief that sin could purge sin all reflected his chart's emphasis on hidden desires and boundary-crossing behaviors. He used to tell young women, if you want to be closer to God, you must first sin with Rasputin. The most disturbing aspect was how his genuine healing gifts became corrupted by his ego. His moon conjunct Pluto in the 12th house, which had originally channeled divine compassion, now manifested as emotional manipulation and buried rage. He began to see his critics not as concerned citizens but as enemies of God's chosen vessel. As Russia entered World War I in 1914, Rasputin's influence reached its peak and began its inevitable decline. His essence shifted to 9 in 1910, the vibration of completion and humanitarian service, but also of endings and transformation. This 6-year phase would encompass both his greatest power and his ultimate destruction. The war was devastating Russia. Millions of soldiers died in poorly planned campaigns. The economy collapsed. Food shortages plagued the cities. And at the heart of the government, influencing crucial military and political decisions, was a Siberian peasant whose judgment was clouded by drugs, alcohol, and megalomania. The Russian people began to see Rasputin not as the protector, but as a symbol of everything wrong with their rulers. How could leaders who claimed divine authority be controlled by a man whose behavior mocked every principle they claim to represent? Whispers spread that the Empress was having an affair with the mystic, that he was a German spy, that he was the real power behind the throne. By 1916, even Rasputin's supporters were turning against him. His progress descendant had fully shifted into Cancer, making him more emotionally reactive and paranoid. He began to sense that his enemies were closing in, but his arrogance, fueled by years of seemingly unlimited power, prevented him from recognizing the true danger. The astrological transits during this final period were ominous. Pluto was squaring his natal Mars, activating violent potential that had always lurked beneath his charismatic surface. His Mars square Saturn natal aspect, which had created lifelong tension between action and restraint, was being pulled to its breaking point by cosmic forces beyond his control.
Play shadow puppets with power, and you're bound to burn the palace down.
By late 1916, the conspiracy against Rasputin included some of the most powerful men in Russia. Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the empire's wealthiest nobles, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's own cousin, and politician Vladimir Purishkevich united around a single goal, eliminating what they saw as a cancer at the heart of the Russian monarchy. Their plan revealed both Rasputin's reputation for being nearly indestructible and the depth of fear he inspired. They knew poison alone wouldn't work. Too many attempts had already failed. They knew a single bullet might not be enough. There were stories of him surviving previous assassination attempts through sheer force of will. On December 30th, 1916, Prince Yusupov invited Rasputin to his palace, promising an introduction to his beautiful wife, Princess Irina. The mystic arrived late that night, dressed in his finest clothes, still believing in his own invincibility. The conspirators had prepared an entire room of poisoned refreshments, cakes laced with enough cyanide to kill 5 men, wine mixed with additional poison. They watched in growing terror as Rasputin consumed dish after dish, glass after glass, seemingly unaffected. His Neptune in the 12th house had likely built up tolerance to various substances over years of abuse, making him resistant to their chemical weapons. When poison failed, they resorted to bullets. Yusupov shot him in the chest at close range. Rasputin collapsed, apparently dead, but as they prepared to dispose of the body, his eyes snapped open. Drawing on reserves of strength that defied medical explanation, he lunged at his would-be killer, clawing at Yusupov's throat before crawling toward the stairs and escape. The other conspirators shot him 3 more times, beat him with clubs, wrapped him in chains, and dragged him to the frozen Neva River. When his body was discovered days later, water in his lungs suggested he had still been alive when thrown into the icy current. The timing of his death reveals the cosmic significance of his end. Rasputin died during his Essence 9 phase, the vibration of completion and transformation that had run from 1910 to 1916. But here's the most haunting detail. He died just days before 1917 began, less than a month from a potential numerological shift that might have changed everything. Had he survived into the new year, he might have entered a fresh Essence phase, potentially moving him toward redemption rather than destruction. A new Essence in 1917 could have softened his corrupted edges, perhaps nudging him back toward his original healing gifts. Instead, Essence 9's closure sealed his fate, creating a tragic tale of so close, yet so far. A mystic cut down, just as cosmic forces might have offered him one final chance at transformation. Within months of Rasputin's death, the prophecy he had made to the royal family came true. Without him to heal their son, without his influence to shield them from popular rage, the Romanov dynasty collapsed. The February Revolution of 1917 forced Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate. By October, the Bolsheviks had seized power. The royal family was imprisoned, and within a year, they were all executed in a basement in Ekaterinburg. Had Rasputin's death caused the empire's fall, or was it merely the inevitable conclusion of cosmic forces set in motion decades earlier? His astrological chart suggests both possibilities. His sun in Aquarius in the 10th house had made him a revolutionary force, but Aquarian energy, when corrupted by ego and power, becomes destructive rather than transformative. Instead of revolutionizing Russian spirituality in a positive direction, he had become a symbol of its decay. His life path, number 1 energy, meant to pioneer new spiritual paths for humanity, had instead blazed a trail toward the destruction of the old order without offering anything constructive to replace it. The cosmic forces that had lifted him from Siberian obscurity to imperial influence had ultimately used him as an instrument of historical transformation, but at the cost of his soul and the lives of millions. Today, more than a century after his death, Rasputin's name still evokes fascination and horror in equal measure. His story resonates in our current age, where charismatic figures with unchecked power often blur the line between influence and manipulation. His cosmic and numerological blueprint reminds us of the precarious tightrope between spiritual gifts and self-destruction. Grigory Rasputin's life was a complex weave of spiritual depth, ambition, and excess, guided by the stars and numbers that defined him. His Gemini ascendant gave him adaptability and duality, while his progressed Cancer ascendant deepened his emotional manipulation. Astrologically, his Sun-Pluto conjunction and Neptune in the 12th house fueled his charismatic power and hidden vices. Numerologically, his Life Path 1 and Essence 9 marked him for leadership and a dramatic end. His documented excesses, the drug use, the sexual rituals, the emotional manipulation, were not aberrations but reflections of his cosmic makeup, written in the stars and numbers that shaped his destiny. Tied forever to the Romanovs' fall, Rasputin's legacy stands as a testament to how one soul's unresolved shadows can ripple through history, toppling empires and reshaping the world. The mystic's body sank beneath the ice that December night, but his archetypal energy continues to manifest in our world, in figures who wield spiritual authority, political influence, or personal charisma without the wisdom to handle such power responsibly.
Be a doll. Hit like, say something clever, and subscribe. And if you got the taste and coin, the description box is waiting.